All right, welcome back. Chapter 7 of The American Play by 12 only. Saturday, September 14th, as Mayor Clarkson approached City Hall that morning, he carried with him the full weight of his city's almost complete collapse. He knew, for instance, that the courts had all but ceased to operate. Committees were not meeting. The work of the Guardians had come to a stop, and Bush Hill was in turmoil despite the heartfelt efforts of the black volunteers there. One after another, the city's newspapers had suspended operations until only Andrew Brown's Federal Gazette and Philadelphia Daily Advisor was being published daily. The National Gazette, under the editorial direction of Philip Freneau, appeared from time to time. Taverns were closing for lack of customers, and the street markets remained deserted. Doctors were openly disputing every aspect of the fever, and the College of Physicians, which had promised to meet every Monday, had given up. Even the blacks of the Free African Society, the only ones who actually doing anything in an organized citywide way, were coming down with the disease. That is why the mayor and a small group of citizens had taken the drastic and legal step of calling for the formation of a special committee to run Philadelphia. Clarkson and his committee had, in effect, seized control of the government. If he needed proof that this was a necessary action, it greeted him that morning at the steps of City Hall. There, Clarkson had to push his way through a crowd of vendors selling coffins and patient medicine cures. Aside from the mayor, the committee was made up of 26 individuals. Through illness and death soon reduced their numbers. In the end, the business of running all of Philadelphia was, as Clarkson would write, principally conducted by 12 only. One of the first decisions made by the committee was to borrow $1,500 for the purchase of medicine, coffins, and a variety of other necessary items, as well as to pay for doctors, nurses, and grave diggers. All told, the committee would spend $37,647.19 to combat the sickness that infested their city. This was a great deal of money, even today, but in 1793 it was a fortune. What was more, the members of the committee could be held personally responsible for all of this money because they had no legal authority to borrow or spend it. The magnitude of this responsibility and the courage of the committee members became clear when we learned that the majority of them were not wealthy. They were, as the mayor himself put it, mostly taken from the middle walks of life. Sorry guys, not enough coffee today. One of them was an umbrella maker, another built cabinets, another chairs, 2 carpenters volunteered, as did a teacher, a mechanic, a coach builder, and a playing card maker. If they were compelled to repay even a portion of the debt, it would ruin most of them financially. Yet they overcame their fears and took on the responsibility in order to save their stricken city and its people. The president of the committee, Clarkson, presided over its daily meetings and helped organize its operations. Specific assignments were then handed out to members. Henry DeForest looked on the formidable task of providing food in the city. Samuel Benn took charge of carrying the sick to Bush Hill and seeing that the dead were properly buried. Once the committee began to act, it was everywhere. The members went street by street to catalog the number of houses boarded up, infected, and open. The homes of the dead fever victims were cleaned to remove the seeds of its infection. Because relatives were sometimes impossible to locate, the committee began to administer the estates of the deceased who had no legal heirs or executors available. After the Potter's Field and Bush Hill cemeteries were full, they took over the public square nearest Bush Hill and began burying paupers there. Out of a committee of supremely enterprising and resourceful members, one managed to outshine the rest in its range of activities he assumed. His name was Israel, a reserved 47-year-old tavern keeper and merchant. When the first orphans were found huddled against a blacksmith's forge, Israel and 2 others were given the task of finding shelter, care, and support for them. A house was rented and a matron hired, the provisions carted to the door of this new city's institution. As more and more children turned up, the orphans committee burden increased in scope until it was caring for 192 children. But Israel's work did not end with helping Philadelphia's orphans. When complaints came in about the foul smell Wafting from Potter's Field smells that many feared were spreading the disease, Israel went to James Swaswood's to personally inspect burial procedures. It was Israel who asked to arrange for the harvesting of grain at Bush Hill. And it was Israel, again, who headed the committee of distribution, the group responsible for warehousing and handing out food, firewood, and other clothes to the city's growing number of needy families. Israel's patience, strength, and ingenuity was tested every day of the plague. It was Israel who went to the almshouse to persuade the institution to open its doors to additional paupers. Israel who met the angry owner of Bush Hill the minute he returned to town to work out fair compensation. He had been called on to help, and he helped in every way possible. Soon after being established, the original committee divided itself into a variety of subcommittees. Each subcommittee handled a specific duty, such as obtaining 500 cords of wood before winter set in, cleaning the streets, and distributing cash to those who needed it. By far, the most desperate situation was at Bush Hill. Medical student Charles Caldwell helped out for a few days and then left. The 4 doctors appointed to attend the patients rarely showed up. 2 of them made a number of visits, but spent more time performing autopsies on dead bodies than administering to the sick. When the guardians ceased performing their duties, it meant that no one was to supervise the place at all. The black nurses did their best to care for, comfort, and clean up the sick and dying, but their task was overwhelming. In September, the average number of deaths per day began to rise at an alarming rate. The relatives and neighbors hurried anyone they suspected of having yellow fever off to Bush Hill. Poor people, Matthew Carey noted, were forced to that hospital, though laboring only under common colds and common fall fevers. Over 100 people now jammed the mansion, and the dead lay unburied. As a member of the mayor's committee, Matthew Carey had a special understanding of conditions at Bush Hill. The sick, the dying, and the dead were indiscriminately mingled together, he recalled. The ordure of other evacuations of the sick were allowed to remain in effect in the most offensive state imaginable. It was, in fact, a great human slaughterhouse. The committee sent a delegation to the house, and a list of needed items was drawn up and ordered. The carpenter was found, and to build beds. A house, cart, and attendants were hired to bring in the sick and carry out the dead. And then 2 committee members, Peter Helm, a barrel maker, and Stephen Gerard, a wealthy merchant, did an amazing thing. They volunteered personally to manage Bush Hill. We don't know much about Peter Helm. He was skilled enough at his woodworking that the ever-demanding President Washington employed him several times to make objects for his household. He was also a devout member of the Moravian congregation, a Christian denomination that accepted the Bible as the sole source of faith and practice. When Helm read Psalm 9:18, "For the needy shall not always be forgotten, the expectation of the poor shall not perish forever," he knew his duty was to serve them. When he read a little later in Psalm 23:4, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil," he knew he would be safe. Helm was a humble man who brought to Bush Hill 3 enduring qualities: the established work ethic, an endless supply of kindness, and an indomitable spirit of courage. Much more is known about the 43-year-old Stephen Gerard. He was French-born, blind in one eye, and he detested inefficiencies and failure. He was one of Philadelphia's wealthiest citizens. He could have fled the city, as others had, from his economic class. But he didn't. He had business to attend to, and besides, he did not believe the illness ravaging his city was a contagious plague. He held to his opinion, even though he contracted a mild case of yellow fever during the last week of August. The sort of near miss had frightened many other citizens into either hiding indoors or fleeing to the countryside. Gerard brought along a calm personality and a steely determination and an unerring sense of organization. And so Peter Helm and Stephen Girard marched off to Bush Hill in mid-September. Noting his assignment in private papers, Girard added, "I shall accordingly be very busy for a few days." In fact, Helm and Girard would faithfully attend to what came to be known as the pest house for 60 days straight. The first thing they did at Bush Hill was to divide the chores. Helm dealt with what went on outside the building, while Girard directed what happened within. Helm established a simple system for receiving new patients and having the dead carted away for burial. He set up areas where coffins could be made, provided decent housing for the nurses and other staff members, had a barn converted so those recovering from their illness could be kept apart from the newly ill, and found storage for supplies. He even had pumps repaired so that fresh water could be provided to patients for the first time. Girard's tasks were even more daunting. First, the interior of the mansion had to be cleaned from top to bottom. Patients were then put in separate rooms, with the dying on one, the very low in another, and so on. Every room in the hall had at least one assigned nurse, most of whom were volunteers from the Free African Society. And because delirious patients sometimes wandered off, a doorkeeper was stationed at the entrance to keep track of who came and went. Setting up such an organized hospital was hard enough. Keeping it operating was even more difficult. As a hot, humid September limped along, the death rate in the city leapt to over 60 a day, and more wretchedly ill people were shipped off to Bush Hill, often in the final stages of sickness. The number of patients rose as the fever raged on, with as many as 140 crammed into the mansion. To handle the increase in patients, the committee ordered that new structure be built to accommodate them. In the space of 4 days, a house 60 feet long and 18 feet wide was erected, complete with 2 chimneys. Another structure was quickly assembled to store empty coffins and serve as a morgue. The strain and pressure of operating Bush Hill might have driven less dedicated individuals to give up or ask for replacements. Helm and Girard stayed at their posts. Girard even helped care for patients. One anonymous witness was astonished by Girard's dedication and compassion, noting, "I even saw one of the diseased discharge the contents of his stomach upon him." What did Girard do? He wiped the patient's clothes and comforted him, arranged the bed, and inspired the courage by renewing in him the hope that he should recover. From him he went on to another that vomited offensive matter that would have disheartened any other than this wonderful man. In the matter of days, Bush Hill was put into decent operating order, and the spirits of the patients began to improve. Both Helm and Girard knew that one more element was needed if a hospital was to succeed: a full-time physician. Once again, a dedicated individual came to the rescue. On September 16th, a 39-year-old doctor and recent arrival to the city volunteered. His name was Jean Devez. It was very likely that Girard had a hand in getting Dr. Devez to volunteer just when he needed him. Like Girard, Dr. Devez was French. Like Girard, he did not believe the fever was contagious. And like Girard, he did not believe in Rush's cure. Girard had condemned the extreme bleeding and purging as a pernicious treatment that sent many of our citizens to another world. At first, there was some hesitation in the committee over hiring a French doctor. It would seem like a slap to all the other American doctors, and especially at Dr. Rush. The American doctors who had already failed the Bush Hill patients were so upset that they even promised to show up more regularly. The situation required several days of wrangling and discussions, but in the end, Girard and Dr. Devez won out. Dr. Devez had not only seen and treated yellow fever while living in the West Indies, he had contracted it twice. His treatment was cautious and gentle. Small amounts of sweetened wine would be given to the patient to stimulate the blood. Quinine would be administered. For nourishment, patients were given veal or chicken broth, creamed rice, and tapioca. Some patients were bled, though only in very small amounts. Let the body do its own healing, Dr. Devez was saying. Clean up the patient in the sick room to remove noxious odors. Provide tea and broth and non-toxic chemical medicine to help the body fight off the fever. As conditions at the hospital improved, so did the reputation of it as a place of healing. When Helm and Girard took over, no one in the city wanted to be taken to Bush Hill, fearing it was a death sentence. By the end of September, everything had changed. No sooner was Pearson affected with a headache, Dr. William Annan observed, than he became anxious to be removed to the Bush Hill Hospital. Despite growing evidence that the French cure was effective in keeping patients alive, it still came in wide criticism. Benjamin Rush attacked the mild methods used by Jean Deves and others, even though he had no real statistics to back his claim. The French physicians are everywhere getting into disrepute. An increasingly combative Rush asserted. They have destroyed at least 2/3 of those who have all perished by the disorder. Peter Helm, Stephen Girard, and Dr. Deves, and all of the nurses and attendants did their best to ignore the controversy and labored on. And every day their fame grew. Later, an anonymous author would issue an account of the malignant fever. In it, the writer detailed the amazing work and dedication that brought order and cleanliness to Bush Hill, and included special praise for the 2 managers. What rewards do these men deserve? Who were instrumental in the lives of many? They gave up their own to help the helpless. Bush Hill became a pocket of calm and hope, but it could not cure or comfort the entire population of Philadelphia. The city continued to stagger under the invisible invaders' assault. As the days marched along, burials rose in number, reaching 80 on September 17th. Elizabeth Drinker heard more stories of friends who had died and lament. Disillusion, cruelty, and distress have of late resounded in our ears from many quarters. Even the ever-confident Dr. Rush mourned that nothing but the powerful of the Almighty could stop it. Inevitably, as Matthew Carey realized, the fear of Philadelphia began to excite the terror of the inhabitants of all neighboring states. In New Jersey, the cities of Trenton and Lamberton resolved that a total stop should be put on the landing of all persons from Philadelphia. The city of Winchester, Virginia, ordered a guard at every avenue of town leading from the Potomac to stop all suspected persons, packages, etc. coming from Philadelphia. Handbills like the one printed in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, were printed alerting citizens to present alarming state of the malignant fever which rages in the city of Philadelphia. Armed patrols scouted country lanes and byways to prevent disease and infectious persons from entering into the borough. Stagecoaches to and from Philadelphia were stopped. Postmasters using tongs to dip mail and newspaper from the city in vinegar and other substances they thought would purify them. Emotions ran high, driven by the fear of the unknown. In Milford, Delaware, a Philadelphia woman and her black servant were stopped on the road outside of town. Her wagon and all of its contents were burned. The woman was stripped, tarred, and feathered, and along with her servant, run off. Citizens in another Delaware town refused to allow one ship from Philadelphia to land and take on fresh water, and they attacked and sank another. To be sure, some of these towns sent money and other items for Philadelphia's relief. Manhattan banned ships and travelers from the stricken town and posted guards at all arrival points, but its citizens also sent along $5,000 in aid. Other towns sent livestock, chicken, carts of vegetables. From the widow Grubb of Chester, New Jersey, came 18 bundles of shirts and dresses for the orphans. All donations were carefully sorted in a ledger by the committee and put to use. Still, its outpouring of charity could not change the new fact of life. Before the month of September was out, Philadelphians found themselves surrounded by scared and hostile neighbors. Even if they wanted to flee, escape was now all but impossible. That is the end of chapter 7.